started with a door, a crack in the frame, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. I got home late just like I always did on Fridays. The office had been suffocating all week, deadlines breathing down my neck, and all I wanted was to drop my bag, kick off my shoes, and let the weekend do its thing. Melissa usually kept the place neat, almost obsessively so. But that night, something was off. The front door wasn't fully closed. Not wide open, just cracked, like someone had left in a rush. I stepped inside and stood still, trying to feel the house. It was quiet, too quiet. No TV hum. No soft music playing from her phone, like she always had while scrolling Instagram. The lights were off except for the kitchen, where the faintest glow spilled into the hallway. I called out her name. Nothing. My first thought was that she'd gone to bed early. She'd been complaining all week about being exhausted from the pregnancy. But my gut whispered otherwise. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I made my way down the hall, the house unusually cold. That's when I noticed the shoes. Her red heels, the ones she hadn't worn since our anniversary dinner months ago, were sitting by the door, not neatly placed like she usually left them, but kicked off carelessly, one on its side. I froze, staring at them. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was nothing. She was pregnant. Maybe she'd felt like dressing up to cheer herself up. People do that, right? But as I walked further into the house, I noticed more. A coat, draped over the back of the couch. Not hers, a man's. I stopped breathing for a moment. My head swam, a storm of possibilities crashing into one another. I moved closer, slowly, almost as if I was afraid the wrong step would make the truth leap out of the shadows. Then I saw it, a half-empty glass of whiskey sitting on the coffee table. I don't drink whiskey. Melissa doesn't either. My hands started to shake as I tried to piece it together. Maybe someone came over, her brother? A friend? But deep down, I knew that was a lie I was telling myself to keep from unraveling. The air felt wrong. Thick, like it was hiding something. I looked toward the bedroom. The door was closed, but a faint hum of voices came from inside. My legs felt like stone, but I forced myself to move forward. My hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like an eternity. The voices stopped. Suddenly, the door burst open. Not from me, but from the inside. Melissa stood there, her hair disheveled, wearing a robe I hadn't seen before. She froze when she saw me, her face flickering between shock and defiance. Behind her, the edge of the bed was visible, sheets tangled in a way that didn't belong to sleep. "Eric," she said, her voice sharp, almost like she was angry at me. "What are you doing home?" "What am I doing home?" I echoed, my voice a low growl. My eyes darted past her to the figure in the bed. A man scrambling to pull on his shirt. He didn't look at me. Coward. My whole body felt like it was on fire. I pushed past her, stepping into the room. She grabbed my arm, but I shook her off. The guy, blonde, wiry, maybe in his early 30s, stood there like a deer in headlights. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and steady. Scared even me. He didn't move, glancing at Melissa like he needed her permission. "Get out." Melissa snapped then, stepping between us. "Eric, stop. You're being insane." "I'm being insane?" I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Explain this, Melissa. Explain him." Her eyes narrowed, her expression shifting to something uglier, more defensive. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "He's just a friend. A friend who drinks whiskey in my living room? A friend who—" I gestured toward the bed, my voice cracking. "Don't lie to me, Melissa." She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "I don't have to explain myself to you." That sentence hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, waiting for something. An apology, regret, anything. But there was nothing, just cold indifference. The guy, her friend, slipped past us and bolted out of the house. Melissa didn't even try to stop him. She just stood there, glaring at me like I was the villain in all this. I took a step back, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. "You're pregnant, Melissa," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this?" Her lip curled into a smirk. A goddamn smirk. "Maybe if you weren't always working late, I wouldn't have to." It was like the floor dropped out from under me. My stomach twisted into knots, my vision blurred. I stumbled back into the hallway, needing space, needing air. She didn't follow me. She didn't say a word. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was who she was. And I couldn't unsee it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, staring into the darkened living room, trying to piece my life back together in my head. Everything I thought I knew had cracked wide open. Melissa didn't come out of the bedroom. She stayed inside, slamming the door shut behind her after her friend fled like the coward he was. I could hear her moving around, but she didn't say a single word to me. No apology, no explanation, nothing. By morning, my thoughts had turned into questions. Who was that man? How long had this been going on? And the one question that burned more than all the others. Was the baby even mine? I wanted to confront her again, to demand answers. But every time I tried to picture the words, my anger would boil over into something uncontrollable. I couldn't trust myself to speak without breaking. So, instead, I sat and waited. Around 8 a.m., Melissa finally emerged from the bedroom. Her hair was tied up, her face calm and unreadable, as if last night hadn't happened at all. She walked into the kitchen like it was any other Saturday, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "Are you just going to sit there all day sulking?" she said, her tone sharp, like I was an inconvenience. I blinked, stunned by her audacity. "Sulking," I repeated, my voice strained. "Melissa, you cheated on me in our house, while you're pregnant, and you have the nerve to call this sulking?" She rolled her eyes and took a sip of water. "I didn't cheat," she said flatly, like she was bored of the whole conversation. "Are you serious?" I snapped, standing up so fast I nearly knocked over the coffee table. "I caught you. I saw him, Melissa, and I told you he's just a friend," she said, setting the glass down with a loud clink. Her tone was icy, calculated. "You're being paranoid. This is why we've been having problems, Eric. You're always so controlling." My jaw dropped. She wasn't just lying. She was trying to turn this on me, like somehow I was the villain here. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "If he's just a friend, why was he in our bed, Melissa? Why was there whiskey on the table? Why was the door open like you were trying to cover your tracks?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "You're not listening to me," she said, her voice rising. "I'm telling you, nothing happened. God, why do you always have to blow things out of proportion? I'm pregnant, Eric. Do you have any idea how stressful this is for me?" That was the breaking point. The pregnancy. She said it like a shield, something to hide behind. But I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that had been clawing at my mind since last night. "Then prove it," I said, my voice cold. She frowned, confused. "Prove what? The baby?" I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "If there's nothing to hide, prove that it's mine." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For the first time since this started, Melissa's composure cracked. She stared at me, wide-eyed, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. "You want a DNA test?" she finally said, her voice dripping with indignation. "Yes," I said firmly. "I think it's the least you owe me right now." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You've got to be kidding me. You're seriously going to accuse me of something like that? You're pathetic, Eric. Call me whatever you want," I shot back. "But if you expect me to stay in this marriage, I need to know the truth. No more lies, no more games. Either we do this test or we're done." Her face hardened. She crossed her arms, her jaw clenched so tight I thought she might break a tooth. For a moment I thought she'd refuse outright. But then she smirked, that smirk, and shrugged. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "If that's what it takes to shut you up, fine. Let's do your stupid test. But when it comes back proving that the baby's yours, don't expect me to forgive you for this." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My hands were trembling, my heart racing, but I nodded and walked out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through. Whatever the truth was, I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. The next few days were a blur of tension so thick it felt like the air itself was suffocating me. Melissa acted as though nothing had happened. She continued her daily routines, chatting on her phone, binge-watching her shows, pretending everything was fine. But every word she spoke dripped with sarcasm. Every glance was laced with disdain. She didn't even try to smooth things over. No remorse, no guilt, just icy detachment, like I was the problem for daring to question her. I avoided her as much as possible, but the silence between us was deafening. The house, once a place I felt safe, now felt like a stranger's. I couldn't trust her. I couldn't trust anything she said or did. Every time she smiled, every time she brushed her hand over her belly like she was some doting mother-to-be, it made my stomach turn. The DNA test was scheduled for Thursday. I booked the appointment at a clinic downtown, one that specialized in prenatal paternity testing. Melissa scoffed when I told her, muttering something about how ridiculous this all was. But she didn't fight me on it. Instead, she wore that same smug look she'd had since the confrontation, like she was a step ahead of me and already knew how this would end. The night before the appointment, something snapped. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read, when she walked in, dressed up again. She wore a tight black dress, her makeup done to perfection. Her hair swept up in a way that made her look like she was heading to a gala. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She glanced at me over her shoulder, her lips curving into a sly smile. "Out." "Out where?" "Just out," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Do I need your permission now?" I stood, setting the book down. "Melissa, are you seriously doing this right now? After everything?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax, Eric. I'm meeting Lila. My actual friend. Not that you'd believe me." Her words were knives, but I didn't let them show on my face. "It's late," I said, my voice steady. "And you're pregnant. Shouldn't you—" "Don't," she snapped, cutting me off. "Don't start with the 'you're pregnant' lecture. I'm not a prisoner, Eric. I can still live my life." Before I could say another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I didn't trust her, not for a second. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and followed her. The streets were quiet as I trailed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding like a drum. She drove across town, weaving through familiar streets until she pulled into the parking lot of a dimly lit bar. A bar. My pulse quickened as I parked a block away and watched her step out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement. Inside, I stayed in the shadows, keeping my distance. The place was small, crowded, and loud enough to hide any conversation. Melissa slid into a booth near the back, her posture relaxed, almost too casual. Moments later, he walked in. It wasn't the man from our bedroom, but it didn't matter. This guy was tall, dark-haired, and exuded the same smug confidence Melissa wore like a second skin. He slid into the booth across from her, leaning in close as they started talking. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a way that made my stomach churn. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms again. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to storm over there, to call her out, to make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. Evidence. Proof. If she wanted to play this game, I'd make damn sure I wasn't the one left holding the blame. She didn't come home until after midnight. I was sitting in the living room when she walked in, her lipstick smudged, her eyes sharp as daggers. "You're still up?" she said, her tone almost mocking. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "How was your night?" She shrugged. "Fine. Lila good." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she smirked. "Yep. Why? You checking up on me now?" I stared at her for a long moment, my blood boiling beneath the surface. "We have the DNA test tomorrow," I said finally. "Make sure you're ready." She didn't respond. She just walked past me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stayed on the couch that night. The images of her at the bar burned into my mind. I knew the truth now, even if the test wasn't done yet. Melissa was a liar, a manipulator, and whatever game she thought she was playing, it wasn't going to end the way she wanted. The morning of the test was eerily quiet. Melissa barely looked at me as we drove to the clinic. She had her sunglasses on, her lips pressed into a tight line, one hand resting on her belly, as if she were the victim in all of this. I didn't say much either. What was there to say? Every time I glanced at her, I saw her laughing in that bar, her hand on his arm. Every excuse, every denial, every smug smirk. None of it mattered anymore. I just needed the truth, and I was about to get it. The clinic was small and clinical, the kind of place that felt sterile in more ways than one. Melissa checked us in, her voice cool and detached, while I paced in the waiting room. When they finally called us back, she walked ahead of me without a word. The test itself was straightforward. A simple blood draw for her, a cheek swab for me. The nurse was polite but curt, clearly used to dealing with tension in these kinds of situations. Melissa didn't complain, didn't make a scene. She just sat there, arms crossed, staring straight ahead like she couldn't wait to leave. As we walked back to the car, I finally broke the silence. "You don't seem too concerned," I said, my voice sharp. She shrugged, unlocking the car door. "Why would I be? You're the one who's acting crazy, not me." I stopped, staring at her. "Do you even care? About any of this? About us?" She turned to face me, lowering her sunglasses just enough to look me in the eye. "Eric, you're the one who turned this into a circus. You're the one who demanded a DNA test. So don't act like I'm the bad guy here." "The bad guy?" I said, my voice rising. "Melissa, I caught you. In our bed. With another man. And now I have pictures of you at a bar with someone else. And you still have the audacity to act like you're innocent." Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked bored. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. I felt the anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I know enough," I said. "And soon, I'll know everything. When those test results come in, there won't be any more hiding, Melissa. No more lies." She laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound that made my blood run cold. "You think you're going to get some big revelation, don't you? That you're the noble husband who'll expose the evil wife. But you don't get it, do you, Eric? You're just pathetic." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I just stared at her, my jaw tight. "If that's how you feel, why don't you just leave?" She smirked, opening the car door. "Maybe I will," she said, climbing in. "After the results come back. Then we'll see who's really pathetic." The drive home was silent. I could feel her anger radiating off her, but I didn't care anymore. Let her be angry. Let her stew. All I wanted now was the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The results came in 3 days later. I was at work when I got the email notification, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the subject line. "Paternity results are ready." I locked myself in my office, my hands shaking as I opened the email. My eyes scanned the document, and there it was, staring back at me in cold, clinical text. "Paternity probability. 0%. I read it again, and again. My brain refused to process it, like the words didn't make sense. But there it was, clear as day. The baby wasn't mine. My vision blurred as I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. A mix of emotions hit me all at once. Rage, betrayal, humiliation, grief. It felt like my entire world had just been ripped out from under me. Melissa's words echoed in my mind. "We'll see who's really pathetic." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. The proof. There was no coming back from this. I forwarded the email to my personal account, grabbed my bag, and left work without a word. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't sit there any longer. By the time I got home, Melissa was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up when I walked in, her expression neutral. "You're home early," she said. I dropped my bag by the door and pulled out my phone, opening the email. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold. Her eyebrows raised, but she didn't move. "About what?" I walked over and held the phone in front of her face, the email glaring on the screen. "About this." Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for the first time, I saw her mask crack. Just for a second. Then she leaned back, crossing her arms. "Well," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "I guess now you know." "That's it," I said, my voice trembling. "That's all you have to say? I guess now you know." What do you want me to say, Eric? She snapped. You were never around. You were always working, always too tired to care. So, yeah, I found someone else. And guess what? He's better than you. Better in every way. Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I stared at her, my hands shaking, my vision blurry with rage and heartbreak. Get out, I said, my voice low and cold. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. This is my house too, she said. You don't get to just kick me out. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. You lied to me. You cheated on me. You've been using me. Get out. Her smirk faded, replaced by something darker. Fine, she said, standing up. But don't think you're some hero, Eric. You're just a sad little man who couldn't keep his wife happy. And now you'll be alone. Forever. She grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was silent again, but this time, it didn't feel suffocating. Felt free. For the first time in days, I took a deep breath and let it out. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done with Melissa. Done with her lies, her games, her cruelty. It was time to start over. Without her. The silence after she left was almost surreal. It was like the house had exhaled, purging itself of the toxicity that had been suffocating it. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the door Melissa had slammed behind her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt still. Not calm, not at peace, but still. Like the storm had passed, and I was finally catching my breath. Then the reality of it all hit me. I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the weight of what had just happened came crashing down. 4 years of marriage gone. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with, exposed as a liar, a cheater, and someone who had never cared about me the way I cared about her. And the baby, my baby, the child I had spent months imagining and preparing for, wasn't mine. It was like mourning a death, except the corpse was the life I thought I had. I stayed on that couch for hours, replaying everything in my head. The arguments, the lies, the way she had smirked at me like I was nothing. Her words echoed in my mind. You're just a sad little man who couldn't keep his wife happy. I wanted to be angry, to hate her for what she'd done. And I was angry, furious. But more than that, I was hurt. Deeply, painfully hurt. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. How had I missed the signs? How had I let it get this far? And most of all, why wasn't I enough? But then, as I sat there, something shifted. I realized that this wasn't about me. It was never about me. Melissa's choices, her lies, her betrayal. They weren't my fault. They were hers. She made those decisions, and she would have to live with them. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my best friend, Dave. We hadn't talked much lately. Life had gotten in the way. But as soon as he picked up and heard my voice, he knew something was wrong. Eric? What's going on, man? I told him everything. From the man in our bed to the DNA results, to Melissa walking out the door with her venomous parting words. Dave was quiet for a while, letting me get it all out. And when I finally stopped talking, he let out a low whistle. Dude, he said, I don't even know what to say. That's messed up. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. But listen, he continued, his tone serious now. This isn't on you. You hear me? She's the one who screwed up. Not you. You did everything you could, and she still threw it away. That's on her, not you. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I don't know what to do now. You move on, he said firmly. One step at a time. It's gonna suck for a while, but you'll get through it. And if you need anything, Eric, you call me. Got it. Got it, I said, my voice cracking. Good, he said. Now go get some sleep. You're going to need it. Over the next few days, I started taking those steps. Small ones, but steps nonetheless. I deleted every photo of Melissa from my phone. I packed up her things and left them by the door, texting her to come pick them up when I wasn't home. I called a lawyer to start the divorce process. It wasn't easy. Every little thing reminded me of her. The mug she used for her tea. The throw blanket she kept on the couch. The scent of her perfume still lingering in the bedroom. but I forced myself to push through it. One item at a time, I erased her from my life. When she came to pick up her things, she didn't say much. She barely even looked at me, just grabbed the boxes and left without a word. I didn't know where she went, and honestly, I didn't care. Then came the texts. At first, they were sporadic. Short, cold messages asking about the divorce paperwork or other logistical things. But after a week, they started to change. "Are you happy now?" One read, "You got what you wanted." Another, "You'll regret this. You think you're better off without me, but you're not. You're pathetic, Eric." I ignored them at first, but when they kept coming, I finally responded. "Melissa," I wrote, "this isn't going to work. You made your choices and I'm making mine. Leave me alone." She didn't reply, and I haven't heard from her since. 1 week turned into 2, then 3, and slowly the fog started to lift. I threw myself into work, hitting deadlines and impressing my boss. I reconnected with old friends, going out for drinks or just hanging out at home. I even started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't a perfect recovery. There were still nights when the memories hit me like a freight train, when the loneliness crept in and made my chest ache. But those nights were becoming fewer and farther between. And then one day, while scrolling through social media, I came across a quote that stopped me in my tracks. "The best revenge is living well." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. It wasn't about getting back at Melissa or proving her wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could survive this, that I could come out stronger on the other side. That's when I made the decision. No more looking back. No more letting her control my thoughts, my emotions, my life. I was going to live well. For myself. For my future. For the life I deserved. And I was going to make damn sure it was a life Melissa could never touch again. It's funny how life feels after the storm. There's this eerie quiet, like you're waiting for the next disaster to strike. But as the weeks turned into months, the chaos Melissa left behind began to fade into the background. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, thanks to the prenup we'd signed before the wedding. Melissa didn't have much to argue over. The house was mine, and so was the car. She took her things, disappeared into whatever life she was trying to build. And for once, I didn't feel the need to chase after answers. I blocked her number after one last venom-filled text. "I hope you're happy with your empty life, Eric." And you know what? I was getting there. One evening, about 3 months after the DNA test, I got a call from a mutual friend. I almost didn't pick up. I was done talking about Melissa, and anyone still close to her was a part of the past I wanted to leave behind. But curiosity got the better of me. "Eric," the voice on the other end said, sounding hesitant. "You heard about Melissa, right?" "No," I said, already bracing myself. "What about her?" "She had the baby," they said. "But there's some drama. The guy she's been seeing, he took off. Doesn't want anything to do with her or the kid." I stayed quiet for a moment, processing the information. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "I thought you should know," they said. "I mean, after everything she put you through, it's kind of ironic, don't you think?" I hung up without responding. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about Melissa, alone now with a child that wasn't mine and no partner to lean on. A part of me felt vindicated. Another part of me felt nothing. For so long, I'd let my anger toward her consume me. But now, hearing about her downfall, I realized I didn't care anymore. Her life wasn't my problem. Her choices, her lies, her betrayal, they had no power over me now. Instead of dwelling on her, I focused on myself. I started picking up hobbies I'd let fall to the wayside during our marriage. I joined a hiking group, rediscovered my love for photography, and even signed up for a cooking class. One day, while scrolling through my phone, I came across the photos I'd taken of Melissa at the bar with that other guy. For a moment, I debated deleting them, but instead, I transferred them to a flash drive and shoved it in a drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder that I'd survived. About 6 months after Melissa left, I went to a work event, a networking mixer I'd usually dread. But something about that night felt different. I walked in feeling lighter, freer, like the chains that had held me down were finally gone. That's where I met her. Her name was Rachel, and she was there representing a non-profit organization partnering with my company. She had this easy smile and a laugh that filled the room without overpowering it. We struck up a conversation about something trivial, office coffee, of all things, but within minutes, it felt like we'd known each other forever. We exchanged numbers that night, and over the next few weeks we started texting. Then came the phone calls, then dinner. I told her everything about Melissa, about the lies, the betrayal, the way it had gutted me. Rachel didn't flinch. She listened, really listened, and when I was done, she smiled softly and said, "That's not the end of your story, you know?" And she was right. Looking back, I don't regret what happened with Melissa. Not anymore. It taught me what I wouldn't tolerate, what I deserved, and most importantly, who I was when the facade of a perfect life crumbled. I learned to trust myself again, to listen to my gut. And I learned that no matter how much someone breaks you, it's always possible to rebuild. Now, as I sit here writing this, Rachel is in the kitchen, humming to herself as she preps dinner. There's a warmth in the house that I haven't felt in years, a sense of peace I didn't think I'd ever find again. Melissa, she's still out there somewhere, probably weaving more lies, chasing something she'll never catch. But she's not my problem anymore. My advice to anyone going through what I did? Trust your instincts. Demand the truth no matter how painful it might be. And most importantly, never settle for less than the love and respect you deserve. Because there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to keep walking toward it. It's been a year since Melissa walked out of my life, and what a year it's been. When you're standing in the wreckage of betrayal, it feels like you'll never climb out. But here I am, writing this proof that you can not only survive it, you can thrive because of it. Life has a strange way of teaching you lessons, and while I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, I'm grateful for what it taught me. I learned the difference between comfort and love, between sacrifice and self-respect. Melissa had been a part of my life for so long that I forgot what it felt like to prioritize myself. Her lies had blinded me to the truth. I deserved better. A few weeks ago, I got an email from her. The subject line was simple: "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe an apology, maybe another round of manipulation, but what I got was complicated. In her message, Melissa admitted that she'd made mistakes. She said she regretted how things ended between us, that she never meant to hurt me, and had been going through a lot. She said the guy she'd been seeing left her as soon as the baby was born, and that she was raising the child alone. She said she wanted to talk. I stared at the words on the screen, feeling a strange mix of emotions. A year ago, I might have jumped at the chance to hear her out, to cling to the hope that there was something salvageable between us. But now I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I just felt indifferent. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I kept focusing on my new life. Things with Rachel are good, better than good. She's kind, supportive, and honest in a way that feels almost foreign after what I went through. We take things slow, building trust brick by brick. She doesn't try to control me, and I don't feel like I have to walk on eggshells around her. Last weekend, she invited me on a hiking trip with her friends. It was one of those crisp, sunny days where everything feels alive. As we climbed to the top of the trail, overlooking miles of rolling hills and sunlit trees, Rachel turned to me and said, "You look happy, Eric." I smiled. "I am," I said, and for the first time in a long time I meant it. Melissa will always be a part of my story, but she's not the ending. She's not even the most important chapter. She was a detour, a painful reminder of what I don't want in my life. I've moved on, not just from her, but from the version of myself that settled for less, that ignored the warning signs, that allowed someone else to dictate my worth. To anyone who's reading this, who might be in the middle of their own storm, I promise you, it gets better. It's not easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if you choose yourself, if you demand honesty, respect, and love, you'll find your way out. I did, and now I'm standing at the edge of something new, something good, something real. And for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to take the next step.